All right, we're in part two of our little discussion of the fraud that went on in science. Can you trust the science? Well, guess what? We're going to now read an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education. This is a serious journal. In fact, in the education field, this is probably the preeminent journal. So you're not looking at some flighty newspaper here. And guess what? Be prepared to be shocked. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
At the title, The Criminologist Accused of Cooking the Books. Let's read this. Last May, 11 criminologists received an email from someone using the name John Smith. Very clever. The pseudonymous message outlines statistical irregularities in 5 published papers on which those criminologists are co-authors. These were more than mere rounding errors or minor oversights. No, these were giant red flags, percentages that couldn't be true, standard deviations that didn't add up, and a host of other issues that defy easy explanation. It defies all explanation except one: fraud. With science. The numbers didn't make sense. The obvious next step in determining what went awry would be to reanalyze the data. That data is in the possession of Eric Stewart, a professor of criminology at Florida State University and the only co-author who appears on all 5 papers. It's Stewart who could presumably clear up what happened. But so far he's been less than forthcoming. Gee, I wonder why. Refusing to share key data even with his co-authors. Now, how would you like to co-author a paper with this dude? Your name is on that paper and he refuses to share the data with you. Can you imagine? Science. Now, I have published a lot of papers. I've had plenty of co-authors, and it's not always true that my co-authors would have had all of the data that went into a paper. It kind of depends on the nature of their involvement in the actual research. However, if one of them asked me for the data, I would be very forthcoming in sending it to them because their name is on the paper. So we go on. Meanwhile, the information he has offered has only deepened the confusion. There's no confusion here. He made the stuff up. For instance, a recently published correction for one of the 5 papers is itself shot through with numerical oddities, leading to suspicions that the numbers don't make sense because the numbers might be, at least in part, made up. So they published a correction to the original paper, and that correction has huge issues with it. The behind-the-scenes fight over these flawed papers has escalated into something more fraught than your standard academic disagreement. While Stewart has remained publicly mum and hasn't responded to multiple interview requests made over several weeks, privately he has been vocal about what he views as a campaign of harassment against him. In emails and text messages sent to colleagues, Stewart has portrayed himself as the target of data thugs.
That's racist.
That was racist.
Yeah, that's racist.
Oh, that is racist.
In a minute, you'll find out who he's talking about specifically. And these data thugs are attempting to ruin his career. In an email to Florida State administrators, he accused one of his co-authors of having essentially lynched me and my academic character. Essentially lynched you? It's a loaded verb choice, not only because Stewart is black, but also because 2 of the 5 papers in question focus on the horrific history of lynching in the United States. Oh, no.
That's more like, zany or goofy. Yeah. It's the wrong kind of loco.
The co-author Stewart referred to in that email is Justin Pickett. For the last few months, Pickett, an associate professor of criminology and criminal justice at New York's University of Albany, has repeatedly pushed Stewart to share the relevant data and has posted online a 27-page critique of suspicious findings in one of the papers. He also contacted Florida State administrators and journal editors, urging them to investigate. Pickett's actions have divided the field of criminology. Some applaud his zeal in attempting to uncover the truth, while others see him as violating unspoken norms of collegiality. Oh, what was that again? Oh, yeah. Trust the science. So they're all over him for violating unspoken norms of collegiality. How dare he bring attention to these errors in the paper? Doesn't he know how we work, how we operate here in academia? Stewart and Pickett are locked in a dispute that reflects a broader debate in social science about the reliability of results and the transparency of methods. But Stewart and Pickett aren't just co-authors. Pickett completed his doctoral work at Florida State, and Stewart was his mentor. In the years since, the two have remained close, commenting on each other's Facebook posts, grabbing beers together at conferences, talking about their growing families, trading academic war stories. I guess Pickett's got a few more now. Well, I guess so does Stewart. Until a couple of months ago, we were really good friends, says Pickett. The only reason I'm doing what I'm doing is that I can't get any answers, and you're not going to get any. The paper that fractured their friendship is also the paper that kickstarted Pickett's academic career. And this is the real sad part about this. Listen in. When Pickett was a graduate student, Stewart asked him if he wanted to collaborate on what sounded like an important paper about criminal punishment and social inequality. Oh yeah, Pickett almost certainly is a lefty. And Stewart waved this in front of him. Social inequality, right on, yeah. Okay. He jumped at the chance. The project took a while, then there were some false starts along the way, whatever. Eventually, the paper, Ethnic Threat and Social Control, examining public support for judicial use of ethnicity in punishment, was published in Criminology, the field's flagship journal, in 2011. Now, what do you think the political bent of that paper was, given that it was published? Getting an opportunity to be a co-author on a high-profile paper came at the perfect time for Pickett, who would soon be on the job market. He knew he had Stewart to thank for that. Actually, what he had was Stewart's leftist leanings. The fact that Stewart faked the data to make this paper very amenable to the left is the reason why Pickett got hired. All along, Stewart had encouraged Pickett, who was his teaching assistant for 4 years. Stewart once referred to him as my guy, a vote of confidence that stuck with Pickett. The letter of recommendation Stewart wrote for Pickett is chock full of praise for his research prowess and affable demeanor. Still planning on writing any more letters of recommendation for him there, Stewart? Stewart wrote that Pickett was one of the top theoretical students we have in our graduate program. And Stewart was continually impressed by his efforts to take on extraordinarily difficult intellectual challenges. So this is not some enemy going after some dude, okay? Pickett was his grad student and friend. Pickett, Stewart wrote, was one of the most enjoyable people I have ever met. You still having fun with him? On Pickett's graduation, Stewart gave him a set of pins with his name engraved on them. I really owe him my career, Pickett says. If Stewart had not put me on that paper, I wouldn't have gotten the job that I have now. Gee, how would you like to go through life thinking that you took the job from somebody else based on a paper that had fraudulent data? And that paper would not have been published if it didn't have the fraudulent data. Why do you think that they fake these articles towards the left every time? When's the last time you ever heard of anybody in academia faking an article to reflect a right-wing political leaning? Have you ever heard of that happening? When they were working on the paper together, Pickett never laid eyes on the raw data the findings were based on. Though he regrets that now, Pickett says it would have been unusual to ask him to review it given the nature of their relationship. He trusted that the more senior scholar had checked the required boxes. That's perfectly reasonable. I mean, technically, you're not supposed to do that. That happens almost every time. I mean, you trust your advisor. Once he had doubts about the data, Pickett found himself faced with a personal and ethical dilemma. Clearly, something was wrong, but pressing for answers he knew came at a cost. It would be awkward for starters. Stewart might find it insulting. And what if the paper turned out to be a fraud? That wouldn't be good for anyone's reputation. The safest course of action for Pickett, who wasn't even the paper's lead author, would be to do nothing and move on, and that is why you can't trust the science. It is true that whenever these co-authors find huge mistakes, they typically will not say anything. It's easier not to. So you have 5 people on a paper, and guess what? Of those 5, one of them might find something really seriously wrong with it. But what good does that do? They're not going to say anything. Pickett is really, really unusual here. We have to give him some kudos for this. Instead, he requested the data from Stewart, gently at first, assuming that he would forward it along. He reminded Stewart in text messages and phone calls to send the information as soon as he could. During one of those calls, Stewart warned him, somewhat cryptically, not to send any emails because that would create a paper trail. That seemed strange to Pickett, but he didn't object at the time. That is really strange. I cannot imagine my advisor when I was in college telling me something like that. That would have shaken me something serious. Of course, it never happened because my advisor was wonderful, above board, salt of the earth, would never dream of putting something fake in an article. So I didn't have to worry about it. As Stewart related the situation to Pickett, he was a victim of shadowy research vigilantes. I'm sorry, but these people are not taking on the role of police officers or judges or juries. Sorry. I'm sorry, but these people are not taking on the role of police officers or judges or juries. Sorry. He even implied at one point that these disreputable people might be trying to steal his data and somehow use it for their own purposes. What do you mean, steal your data? It's supposed to be publicly available. This is published research, unless you have a strict confidentiality agreement worked out with the journal. You can't hide the data. And in fact, nowadays, you have to publish your data separately in an archive. They won't let you publish without doing that. Of course, that doesn't help if the data itself is a fraud. All of the blame is being directed at me, Stewart texted Pickett. For some reason, data thugs are after me. Stewart had known since at least February that questions had been raised about his data. Before John Smith, whoever he was, had sent an email to the co-authors on those 5 papers, he had contacted Nick Brown and James Heathers, 2 researchers known for ferreting out and exposing scientific misconduct. Brown and Heathers have scrutinized papers for evidence that the results have been massaged or outright faked. I bet they're pretty busy. They've also written software programs that can detect when certain results are unlikely or statistically impossible. I'll give you an example. They will run the last digit to the right of a decimal point from digital readouts. Those numbers should be random. If they're not random, it's fake, within statistical certainty, of course. Heathers and Brown, along with a small band of analytically inclined compatriots, have sometimes been referred to as data thugs for their efforts to push for more rigor in social science and their willingness to call out shoddy research. That's right. When you push for more rigor in social science and when you call out shoddy research, you're a data thug. Trust the science. As they have done in other cases, Heathers and Brown combed through the data that John Smith emailed them in February. That email zeroed in on a paper, A Legacy of Lynchings, Perceived Black Criminal Threat Among Whites. I wonder what the political angle of the results of that paper turned out to be. Published this year in Law and Society Review. The paper has 5 co-authors, including Stewart and Daniel Mears, who, like Stewart, is a professor of criminology at Florida State. In the paper, which examines whether the attitudes of white people toward the punishment of black criminals might be related to the history of lynching, there were, according to Heathers, a host of unusual features in the data. You see, racism is so hard to find, you have to fake the data to get it. Among the most unusual features was the sample size, 2,736 American adults. That's a sizable survey, the cost of which would almost certainly run into 6 figures, and yet no funding source was listed. 6 figures? No, I don't believe that. Who footed the bill? Maybe even more remarkable was the response rate. 61%? Oh, wow. Okay, that's impossible, which is extraordinarily high for a phone survey. Okay, that's the reason why it was so expensive. I thought they were mailing them out. I have used survey companies before, like ARC out of the University of Missouri, to do some research, and that was mail surveys. It wasn't nearly as expensive. Of course, the response rate was like 3%, but it was cheap. Phone surveys, oh, I can see that. The decline of landlines has made conducting phone surveys increasingly difficult. People don't answer calls from unknown numbers, and it's impossible to know whether a person's area code matches their actual location. Pew Research Center published a report this year that lists typical response rates for phone surveys at less than 10%. Okay, that's more reasonable. So it would be amazing if the majority of the people the survey organization reached out to had actually agreed to participate. Borderline miraculous, in fact. Yeah, agreed. Speaking of survey organizations, which one had conducted this curious survey? Stewart and Mears hadn't revealed its name in the paper. And the organization Stewart used in the past, Research Network, had shut down before this survey was carried out. Okay, what that's telling me? There was never any data. They completely fabricated all of it. And I'm kind of curious as to why the journal didn't request for the name of the survey company. I would have thought that that would be part of it. I don't publish much in the social sciences, so maybe they don't, but I would have thought that that would be important. The survey had caught Pickett's attention when he heard about it last year. Pickett isn't a co-author on that paper, but he wrote to Stewart to ask what organization had conducted it. Stewart told Pickett in an email at the time that some grad school buddies had trained students to make calls, and in return, Stewart had helped them with some analysis on their projects. You have got to be kidding me. That seemed awfully vague to Pickett. Who were these grad school buddies, and why would they take on such a costly and time-consuming project for no pay? Stewart didn't say, so Pickett shrugged and let it drop. Think about this. Let's go back. You're looking at 2,700 responses. Now, keep in mind, you only have a 61% return rate, although that's astronomically high. So that means they must have called about 5,000 people. 5,000 phone calls. And this guy is saying that he just got some grad students to do it for him in exchange for some analysis on their projects. Really? Okay. Who out there would do this? Even if you had 5 grad students, that's still 1,000 phone calls. Can you imagine? What grad student would ever volunteer for this kind of thing? None. Heather Zen Brown emailed Mears, who was the lead author on the paper. Lead author. They asked to see the data set and explained their concerns. Mears replied that he would look into it but didn't send the data and didn't respond to subsequent emails. Oh no. Mears also didn't reply to interview requests for the story. Heather's emailed with Stewart about setting up a phone call, but that conversation never took place. I can almost guarantee you that Stewart knew that Mears was not going to go along with the phone call conversation, and I have a feeling that Stewart told Mears ahead of time not to do it. Oh, he would never do anything like that. Then came the John Smith email. That email pointed to apparent problems in 4 more papers. There seemed to be irregularities in the data and findings in 5 articles that you published together with 2 surveys, the email said. Over 9 pages, Smith summarized those irregularities and included links to highlighted excerpts and charts. This is a very deliberate, careful examination. The email is a dry, just the facts account of the situation, but those facts are troubling. In a later message sent to Florida State administrators, including the Director of Research Compliance at the university's Office of Research, Smith again explained what he had found, calling it a case of probable research misconduct by Eric Stewart. Stewart replied to that email, promising to investigate the claims. I'll get to the bottom of this, he's saying. And if there are in fact problems, we will address them. Okay, here's my issue. If somebody emails me saying, we think that you have behaved fraudulently on a paper, I'm not going to say, well, I'll look into it and I'll get back to you. I'd be like, how dare you? I mean, I might not be able to answer the questions right at that moment, but I'm not going to be taking too long. In a text message, Stewart told Pickett about the email sent to the research office and how it would likely trigger a university investigation. That investigation, according to a Florida State spokesman, is underway. I doubt it. Remember, this is 2019. So let's see here. Academic fraud. Let's check to see what has happened to Stewart and Mears. Well, let's scroll on down here. There's Mark Gertz. We'll hear more about him later. There he is, Daniel Mears. He's still a faculty member at Florida State University, even though he was the lead author on a paper that had massive fraud in it. And guess what? Eric A. Stewart, he is still on the faculty. So much for Florida State University's investigation. When I hear, well, we're currently investigating it from a university, that means they ain't doing jack. Okay, and we move on. That's really concerning, man, Pickett wrote. I'm very worried about all this. Stewart was apologetic. Sorry for all this shit, man. It's the new academic life, I guess, Pickett replied. A lot of post-publication scrutiny. Oh, how dare they scrutinize publications? This feels like more than that, but yeah, I get what you're saying, wrote Stewart. This is the new academic life. Yeah, we wish. Pickett also reminded Stewart to send him the data. Good luck. In the meantime, though, Pickett decided to do some poking around of his own. After looking through some of his files left over from his Florida State days, Pickett discovered that the now defunct organization that conducted the survey for their 2011 paper had interviewed only 500 people, not the 1,184 reported in the paper. What about those other 684 people? Where had they come from? Stewart, who did eventually send Pickett that original data, first said that somehow duplicates had been included. In other words, responses had been mistakenly counted more than once. Oh yeah, These are top-notch researchers, everybody. Then, he later said that 425 respondents from a second survey should have been included, but for some reason were not. I wonder why. Doggone it, that is such a mystery. Despite there being no mention of a second survey in the paper, and even though the total still wouldn't equal 1,184, and you may be wondering, well, why didn't he tell Pickett a number that would have added up to 1,184? And the answer is obvious, everybody. It would have been too obvious. He undercut it by a certain amount to make him look more believable. In other words, he didn't want to push it. This only made Pickett more suspicious. Why did the explanations keep shifting? Why wasn't Stewart sharing everything, including the second survey? Why did nothing add up?
Science!
Even if the question of how many people were surveyed and by whom could be answered, other contradictions remained. For example, the article reported that respondents came from 91 counties, but it turns out that the real number, upon closer inspection, was 326. Stewart explained that the 91 listed counties had been misreported. They were actually county clusters. Okay. But after studying a map, Pickett determined that you couldn't come up with that number of county clusters, and Stewart wouldn't explain his math. What's more, effects reported in the paper as positive were in fact negative, so they switched the responses from yes to no. There were also missing values in the surveys, which happens when a survey respondent declines to reveal a particular fact, like salary or age. That, in itself, was not unusual, but Pickett found that the missing numbers, present in 208 of the 500 interviews, had been filled in with imputed values. That is, essentially educated guesses. The paper made no mention of these imputed values. In other words, what is your race? Oh, this person didn't mark it down. Well, what was his response? Well, let's mark him as black. He must be black. That name Bill Johnson, yeah, that sounds like a black name. Let's go ahead and mark him down as black. That's what they did. The paper was so riddled with errors and misleading information that it was hard to see how any of its conclusions could be trusted. They can't. It was also hard to see how these blunders could be chalked up to simple sloppiness. I'm going to stop here. We're going to next hear from the editors of this journal, Criminology, and they're going to step in and save the day. They're going to step in and say, I need everybody to step away because guess what? We're on this. We're going to check this thoroughly. And if there's any fraud in these journal articles, there will be hell to pay, right? Oh yeah. Hang around, everybody. You'll see. Like my video and subscribe to my channel.